Hello everybody, Cone Dodger here. Welcome back to Automation. Today we're going to continue on our engine recreation mini-series, but move away a little bit from the American motor recreations and kind of do a special one-off episode on truck motors. Truck motors are something I've had a couple requests for, particularly when I was doing the GM series. I had a couple requests for the LM7, the LQ9, so those are two that I'm going to do. And just through my own curiosity, I picked up a few more, you know, your basic truck motors. And obviously, we don't have diesels to work with, and we don't have V6s, so we're a little bit limited in what motors we can make. And obviously, there's no truck bodies or anything like that in the game just yet. But that doesn't mean we couldn't be prepared for such things in the future and have a few truck motors to choose from. So let's go to the sandbox. We are going to start off with the LM7 Generation 3 Vortec 5300. Basically the LM7. Now this motor is fairly similar to the LS/350 line of motors, but with some pretty big variances. We are going to have a cast aluminum block, and the bore is going to be 96, and the stroke is going to be 92, so a little bit shorter stroked than the LS1 or 350 motors, and that is what makes up that 5.3 liter or 5300 cc style motor. You can see it's a 325 cubic inch motor, so just a little bit smaller than the 5.7 or 350 motor. Let's see, we're gonna do now the bottom end stuff. I don't have a massive amount of information on any of these motors for that, and I think the reason for that is it's pretty much your standard assortment of bottom end parts, because none of these motors are high revving and none of them are particularly high torque. They're higher torque than their car oriented counterparts, but they're not diesel 600 foot-pounds or, you know, big block 454 massive amounts of torque kind of motors. They're just higher torque, more usable torque, more usable bottom end than your street car motors. So this is the kind of assortment I'm going to pick for most of these motors, and we'll play with it and see if it works. I might have to adjust the quality some as we go. Top end, it's a GM motor, so that means odds are it's going to be a pushrod, and in fact it is. 2 valves per cylinder, as you can only have with a pushrod setup. Compression is 9.5, so smack dab in the normal range there. Cam profile, I'm actually going to lower that down to a 35. Just a hunch because of the numbers we need from this motor. No VVT or VVL. The year, I'm going to stop the year at about 2003. The years stretch a huge time span for this motor, so it's pretty much irrelevant, but we'll keep it realistic. Actually, let's even, yeah, 2003 is a good number. Style-wise, nothing fancy. Boy, I don't even know if those louvered style would be too much. I think just the good old stamped plain ones would work. This is a workhorse motor, it's nothing fancy. Naturally aspirated, obviously. Fuel system, it is injected, and it is multi-point injected. A lot of these motors were single-point injected for a long time, but eventually, once we got into the 2000s, they did start putting multi-point on it. It is not as fancy or nice as this appears, but it is a multi-point system, so we will keep that, and a standard intake. This motor runs on regular 87, 86.4, close enough. We'll go up to a 13.2, maybe even a 13.3, or 13.1, sorry, on the fuel mix. Ignition timing, we'll leave that at 50 for now. I'm showing a max engine speed or max RPM of 6,000 RPM, which, if you're using all 6,000 RPM of this motor, you're probably going to be disappointed. You know, they have a pretty steep fall off once you hit the max peak power. Headers are going to be just probably a short cast, and we'll do a single exhaust, but with a, we'll say 2 3/4 inch exhaust. That should be plenty of room for the power we need to make. Put a 3-way can on there, and we'll probably do a straight through, like a resonator, and then a reverse flow, because they don't want it to be too loud from the factory. And let's see if we can make 295 horsepower at 5,200 RPM and 335 foot-pounds of torque at 4,000 RPM. Pretty short on both. I'm wondering if maybe we had a little bit of an octane issue there. 87, yep, it is just... Obviously we have 87 fuel, but unfortunately we don't have that to choose from in the game. But that's not too dramatic. That I can probably just drop the timing a little bit, and it should fix that. So let's do a quick test here. It does indeed, but we are 86.5 out of 86.4, so just a little bit more. Now let's do a full test. So 335 foot-pounds of torque. That's what's most important to me, that we hit that number. 327, we're just a little shy of that. And pretty dramatically shy of that 295, so we got a little work to do. No more knock issues, so we can do some tuning. There's a big enough variance between the torque and the peak horsepower that I think we can afford a little bit more cam profile as well. And that means we can give it just a little bump in timing as well. So let's see what that gains us. Cam profile is a tricky thing. You can go too far really quick. 333 foot-pounds of torque, that's getting real close. 280 horsepower, still a little bit short though. That means that we only need a little bit more torque, but quite a bit more horsepower, so I'm actually going to go up on that cam profile even a little bit more, which is surprising. Do a quick test here. 337, 292. Getting closer. Now what I might do is back off on that just one click, and back off on the ignition timing just one click. Try and even these numbers out just a hair. 336, 289, still a little low on the horsepower. Obviously, as I take cam profile away, it's going to hurt the peak horsepower. So we'd like not to do that, but I don't want too aggressive of a cam profile because this motor does not have an aggressive cam profile. But I have seen something that I made a mistake, and some of you have already picked up on it. I left the heads as cast iron, and they are indeed aluminum. So let's see, the difference between the two is minimal. You can see even the stats show the same: low, high, very high on friction, and low on airflow. But we'll see just what a difference that makes. 332 and 286. We actually lost a little horsepower through that. Lost a little torque and a little horsepower. So back up on the timing if we have the room, and we do. $335, $290, or $334, $290. So maybe just 2 clicks there. Yep, that's close enough for both numbers. We're only one off on each, and I like that. That is within reason. I wish we didn't have this big engine cover, but that's kind of true to everything. I don't know what it is with manufacturers these days, but they just put plastic over everything so you can't see the motors. I guess it makes it seem less complicated to people. I'm not really sure. But that is the LM7 Vortec 5300. So now we're going to keep this motor up because we're just going to do some slight variances, and we're going to make the LQ9 Vortec high output 6000. So this motor is basically the high performance truck motor. So it's not a high performance in the way that a that a LS6 is versus an LS1, but it does truck things better than the regular LM7. So let's rename before I forget. LQ9 Vortec, and it's actually called the Vortec Max. I like that name better, so I'm choosing it. Okay, so what changes do we need to make here? It's still a cast iron block, but the bore steps up to a 101.6. 101.6. And the bore, the stroke will stay at 92. So basically, it's just bored out, not stroked in any way versus the regular LM7. That gives us a 364 cubic inch motor or a 6-liter motor. We've seen 6-liter motors before, but they had a much different bore and stroke than this. So this is a little bit unique in the lineup. Keep the bottom end the same. Keep the top end pretty much the same, but we're going to go up to a 10.0 compression. Let's see. One thing I didn't do was increase the quality on the pushrod setup. I didn't really need to with the last motor, so we'll leave this one the same as well. This is all the same, except that this motor is tested at and is recommended to run premium fuel, so that is what we will put it on. And let's see, anything else different? Not really. Iron block, aluminum head. Everything else looks pretty much the same. Our max RPM is the same. We're going to go up to a 3-inch exhaust just to give us that extra room for the power we need to make. And we are trying to make 345 horsepower at 5,200 RPM, so a little bit more, not too terribly much, but 380 foot-pounds of torque at 4,000. So exactly the same RPMs, but just more of both. So it looks like very good on the torque, 381 versus 380. That's about perfect. And a little low on horsepower, so I'm going to up the cam profile up to maybe a 50, since this is quote-unquote a little bit more of a sporty motor. So we'll see how that affects the torque. That's what I'm most interested in here. It should still raise it, but the numbers should be closer in my mind. Indeed what we have, 382, so only gained 1 foot-pound of torque, but all the way up to 344 horsepower, and that is, I believe, close enough. Fuel octane, we are very safe, so I'm going to give it just a tick up on timing, or 2, and see if we can get that horsepower up to the 345 number. If we've got the octane to use, we might as well use it. Oh, too far. It's a sensitive thing. 340. Okay, so that's going to be close enough. So I've already named it. I think we're all good there. Okay, so we're going to just keep moving right along here. I'm going to keep this same motor up, but we're going to completely change manufacturers and virtually everything about this motor. So we're going to go for the Nissan VK56DE, which is the Nissan Titan motor, also in the Armada and basically all of their larger truck bodies. So this motor represents what Japan thinks a truck motor should be versus what the United States manufacturers think a truck motor should be. Now, what I'm not covering today is the Ford motor, and that is because we pretty much already covered it. They use a very similar modular motor to what is in the Mustang. It's just, the only difference is that it's a single overhead cam instead of a dual overhead cam. So Ford, I would say, is kind of in the middle ground between the two. GM, very simple motor. It just works. You know, it's push rod and it makes a good amount of torque, and they have tuned it to a point where it's fairly fuel efficient. but the Japanese manufacturers take a more of a car engine approach to it, I believe. So we have an aluminum block with a 98 by 92 configuration. So a little bit bigger than the LM7, but smaller than the LQ9. So we're going for 492, so that stays the same. The bottom end, again, I'm going to leave everything just as it is. It should be fine for what we're doing. Top end, though, now we have dual overhead cam. Dual overhead cam and 4 valves per cylinder. Aluminum heads, obviously. And the compression ratio is 9.5 to 1. And cam profile, I'll go to 40 to start with. Let me bring up my notes real quick. Let's see. This motor does have VVT on all of the cams. No VVL. Style-wise, let's see. Style-wise, not too important, but this is a good representation right there. It is naturally aspirated. Fuel system is regular multi-point EFI and running on regular unleaded. This all looks good. The max engine speed is significantly lower than the GM motors we did, which is 5,100 RPM. So that's actually a little bit surprising to me, since this motor is overhead cam, and you would think it would be able to spin up a little higher. But I believe part of the reason for that is it's making its peak power so much earlier, which gives you a much more usable truck, you know, kind of power band, at least in the sense that you can get up and going quicker. Sometimes having a nice long rev band is a little bit more easy to drive, but apparently this is working out for them, so that's why we have such a low RPM limit. Header wise and everything like that, they do put dual exhaust on these trucks, and we'll go down to 2 1/4 on each because we don't need much more than that with a dual setup. This all looks good here, and just regular short cast headers. Let's see, anything else? God, I'm kind of flying through these because I want to do 4 motors today, so just don't want to chew up too much time. That all looks good. And let's start. Okay, so I forgot to call out the numbers there. They'll be on the screen, but we're looking for 320 horsepower at 4,900 and 393 foot-pounds of torque at an undisclosed amount of RPM. Now that 320 horsepower, we are pretty high above that and pretty far below that max torque. This is one of the biggest variances I've seen in any motor that I've built. 320 horsepower versus 393 foot-pounds of torque. It's definitely going to take some work to get there. So I'm going to, let's see, how we're doing in octane. Not great, but there's room to work with. So I'm going to go down to a 30. And let's see, just do a quick test here to see. I got our gap to be more fitting, 319 horsepower, 360 foot-pounds of torque, but still so much to make up to get that 393 foot-pounds of torque. Let's see. I don't really know what else I could do. I have a little bit of room in the ignition timing, but not much. Not much at all. 358. We actually lost a little power there, or lost a little torque. That's odd. And now we're knocking, so that will definitely reduce things. Okay, so we're gonna have to do a little experimenting here. I'm gonna run through some stuff, and I'll come back to you if I figure anything out. Alright, so I've spent some time working on this thing, and I think I've gotten close enough that I can be happy. I've done some pretty weird things that we will look at, but 393 foot-pounds of torque, I made 391. 320 horsepower, 324, so just a little high. So I've gotten that big gap, you can see. A very, very smooth and high torque curve, and the horsepower does not really come in till very late and stops at 324. So that is pretty much what I was looking for. So let's look at some of the stuff I had to do for this. Top end quality of 5, and cam profile all the way down to 21. Fuel system, I put a performance intake on it. Just out of necessity to try and get the power to come back up. Premium unleaded because I really needed 87. And only had 86.4 to work with here, so bumped it up to 90. Timing all the way advanced, just rocket that way up. Fuel mix, and that is pretty rich as well, 12.8. So a little bit of trickery here to get the numbers to be right, but that is basically the goal here. I just want to build motors that represent the stats that I have and try and get the numbers to be as close as possible. That is basically the only goal I have with this series. And to learn some stuff about motors I don't know anything about, and it's been very successful at that. I think my knowledge of motors of the world has increased quite a bit. I don't think I did anything too trickery through here. No, that all looks the same. So that is how we came up with the VK56DE Nissan Titan motor. Alrighty, so now that I've chewed up a bunch of time, let's do one more. Why not? So we're gonna go ahead and tackle the Toyota 3UR FE, and that is the current generation Toyota Tundra motor. Okay, so this one we're gonna increase the year a little bit. Actually, now that I think about it, that Titan should have been a couple years newer as well. That wouldn't have too much of an impact. So we're going to go up to 2009 on this one. We're going to keep everything pretty much the same down here, except we're going to go for a 94 by 102. So for the first time, we got a long stroke motor, which you would expect out of a truck motor. I expected them to be a little bit more in this configuration than they have been, but this is the first. Top end is the same, dual overhead cam, 4 valves per cylinder, aluminum heads, compression ratio much higher, 10.2 to 1. Let's put the quality down at 0 to start with. Cam profile up to 40 to start with. We do have VVT on all of the cams. Style, we will keep it the same, except I'll change the color on this one just to differentiate the two. We'll go with the gray. Anything else? That's all the same. No turbos. But down here we have direct injection. So that is a pretty new technology, and this is probably the first truck motor I've seen that has it. And that makes for some pretty impressive numbers, as you'll see. We can really mess around with this fuel mix if needed. The fuel type, it can run on regular, but the numbers are from a premium setup, so we will keep it at that. I'm actually going to keep this 12.8 as well, because we can run, actually I'm going to go down to 13, because we can run pretty lean with that direct injection. And bring this down to 50, down in the normal range. So the rev limiter looks to be at 5,900 RPM, so much higher than the VK motor, and in line with the GM motors. Exhaust, one thing that Toyota has made a big fuss about in their advertising for this truck was, for this motor, was that it has tubular headers on it. So we're darn well sure going to put tubular headers on it. We'll need, only the 2 1/4 piping will be plenty. And this exhaust system will work just fine as well. So numbers, what are we trying to make here? So this one quite a bit higher than the Titan motor, and the highest horsepower rating we will have done today. Let me rename it real quick before I forget. 3UR FE. So we are looking for 381 horsepower at 5,600 RPM, and 401 foot-pounds of torque at 3,600 RPM. Pretty high numbers on both, if you ask me. Ooh, almost on the money on the torque. Pretty dramatically too high on the horsepower. And as I kind of wondered, we are starting to run into some bottom end issues, especially with that long stroke setup. Now, again, I have no information on the bottom end of this motor. I can only assume that it is cast. It could only be that there is powder forged connecting rods in there. So I'm going to try that, and if that doesn't fix it, we'll just go right back and mess with the quality. So before I even start messing with the power, let's get that taken care of. Nope, that did not fix it, so we'll go back to cast. And we will just increase the quality. Yep, that takes care of that. So we don't even have to worry about that. Alright, so numbers-wise, way low on fuel octane, so we're not even coming close to using all of that. Which means I can lower this cam profile way down, try and get the power down and keep the torque. 386, 346. So that was too far. Let's see, let's go back up to 32. Still too much. So let's try maybe a 37. 395, 393. So now the horsepower has come up too high. So I'd rather we get that torque, that gap to be right, and then we'll tune it from there. So 32. Okay, so now we've got a big gap between the two, about a 20 difference between the two is what we need. So let's just try and give it more power through the ignition timing on both attributions. Wow, that was almost on the money there. So let's see if we can get 400 horsepower, or sorry, 381 horsepower and 400 foot-pounds of torque. Okay, so about 1 foot-pound of torque too much and 2 horsepower too much. I think I'm okay with that. I think that's a variance I can live with. I will just go 1 click down on timing just to see. Yeah, I didn't take it there. So yeah, I think that is good enough. So save that one as well. Hope I saved that VK. I don't remember doing that. If not, I will rebuild it so that it will be in the set, even though that one was a pain in the butt. Alrighty, so I think that is going to do it for today. Let's see. Ah, good, I did. That is going to also wrap up the engine recreation series for a little while. It's not going away, but I want to start getting into doing actual car builds and doing some creative builds, building my own stuff for a little while. The recreations are fun. It's a lot of great knowledge that I'm gathering through it, but I feel like getting a little creative, so that is what we will do next week. There is also an update to the game coming very soon, so hopefully we can basically build a complete car, and hopefully that will be by next episode, so we will see. But as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.